This morning, we're discussing the design of career technical schools, and we have two distinguished speakers with us today. We have Laura Wernick. She's a senior principal at HMFH Architects with over 40 years of experience in the planning and design of public schools. She pairs her planning experience with her design skills to create environments that adapt to changing pedagogy and to help students flourish. And Laura is an AIA Fellow and member and past president of the Boston Society of Architects. In 2014, she was awarded the Boston Society of Architects Women in Design Award of Excellence. We also have Carl Franceschi. Carl's a principal at DRA and a leader of their design teams for K-12 projects. He approaches each with an open, collaborative spirit that sees every project as an opportunity to truly improve the learning environment for teachers and students. During the course of his 40-year career, he's been involved in well over 100 school projects and studies throughout New England, and he has a particular interest and expertise in career technical education, and he's worked on 20 CTE schools. Carl's work is grounded in the belief that architecture is creative problem solving in service to others. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura and Carl. Take it away.
Well, Tina left out a very critical piece of our joint bios, which is that Carl and I went to Cornell together many years ago. So it's been fun to have kind of parallel careers, to both be engaged with education and to occasionally be able to do something like this together. So I really enjoy that. I also take some credit in Carl's success in his career, because when we were together, Carl was known as very dedicated, hard worker, and had the ability to stay up hours and hours beyond anyone else. And there was one night when he'd been up working in the studio, we were preparing for final presentations, and I was sitting near him, and I started watching his head start to bob as he was getting tireder and tireder and tireder. And watching that, I realized he had what in the days we used to have lead holders, because we drafted on real drafting boards. And I grabbed the lead holder out of his hand and tore it away from him just as his head fell down on his desk to sleep. And I'm sure that his eye would have been poked out.
I'm eternally grateful, Laura.
Exactly, good. Glad to hear that. So on that note, let's get back to the CTE stuff. So today we're going to talk about, we'll be giving a little bit of an introduction to what is career tech education, what is career tech education today. And then Carl, who's been really so involved with career tech education for so long, is going to talk about how it's changed and how that's really impacted school design. The design of facilities over the years have really had to change and adapt as our understanding what career tech ed has changed. It's a particularly exciting time right now in career tech education. And those of you who are in the education field or designing for schools probably have seen this kind of list before. This is from the 2020 World Economic Forum, which is the top 10 skills of 2025. And certainly educators and people who design for schools are very aware of this. And for those of us who design in middle schools, high schools, we like to think we're designing to create environments to support the educators as they help their students develop these skills. And in the past, I think CTE has always been thought of as kind of a narrow set of skills. Maybe out of this list, maybe that the technology use, monitoring, control might be considered a career tech skill, or technology design and programming might be considered a career tech skill. But if you talk to career tech educators today, they would look at this list and say, "Oh yeah, we do all of that. This is what career tech education is really good at." And I think other educators are kind of starting to see that as well, that the engagement in hands-on learning, the engagement in solving real life problems excites students and keeps them involved and spurs their curiosity. And it's a wonderful avenue, a wonderful venue for keeping kids engaged in their academic career, getting them to think of themselves as lifelong learners. All those things that we want all of our students to be are happening in career tech schools now. And there is, while we traditionally think of career tech schools as creating skills so students can move successfully into careers and move on to higher ed, that higher ed is happening more and more frequently now. We're seeing the push in career tech schools, and we talked about this a lot today, towards how do we integrate academic with the traditional career tech programs, so the kids are getting a full, well-rounded education. And that focus on relevant real-world challenges is impacting all educators. So I think the students themselves and their parents are seeing career tech as a serious and strong path to leadership and to social change. So career tech education is in demand. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Carl and let him talk a little bit about how this evolution occurred and its impact on school design.
Thanks, Laura. You'll hear a few common themes running through this presentation, I think, that Laura's introduced here. And one of them, surprisingly, is how responsive career tech education has been through the years in reality. Even though it started off as you might say, a very second-class kind of education for the so-called kids who, weren't going to go to college or weren't college material way back in, the early 20th century. One way just to summarize that is in this little chart here, showing how just even the evolution of the names started off as trade schools for a very industrial kind of economy, and the buildings themselves were very industrial. As our economy evolved in the United States, and particularly in the 50s, and more emphasis on science and the space challenge and Sputnik and that sort of things, more career training in the science and so-called vocational technical skills was prevalent, and particularly here in Massachusetts, which has been very progressive in this area compared to the rest of the United States. In fact, developed regional career vocational schools in suburban areas, whereas trade schools had originally been more in urban areas where manufacturing was. We saw the 60s, early 70s of a whole generation of regional career vocational schools. They tended to be, and I'll show you some examples of sprawling and segregated kind of facilities. Segregated meaning academic areas being segregated from vocational areas. As our economy has changed to be more informational and innovation based, and more about lifelong learning and so forth, the nature of these buildings has changed. We now refer to it as career technical education, and the facilities, as you'll see some examples, are more integrated, more flexible, and in fact more not necessarily training graduates for one particular field, but training them to have those skills that we want all learners to have, to be more flexible and become lifelong learners and career problem solvers and so forth. We could move on there, Laura. So here's a couple examples. In fact, a couple projects. I apologize for the fuzzy nature of this slide, but this is a traditional trade school, particularly the upper part there. If we click on that, you'll see that the original building built somewhere around in the 1920s. This is the Springfield Trade School, as it was called. It is organized very much like a mill building, in fact. And then in the 70s, they added a one-story vocational wing there. And just to look at the floor plans too, you'll recognize there's a long central corridor and basically shops on either side that spanned much in a mill building kind of typography there, that on multi-stories, actually, somewhat flexible that they could carve out classrooms in there, but clearly the shops were segregated from the multi-story front building, which had academic and administration spaces. As we evolved, next one, here's a more progressive building. This happens to be Greater New Bedford Vocational School, built in the early 70s. But it too had a multi-story vocation or multi-story academic sort of core, actually organized around an atrium, and a one-story sprawling vocational wing with the so-called high bay shops. And it makes some sense from an architectural point of view, you might say, because clearly academic areas, classrooms can be organized with a certain floor-to-floor height. Vocational spaces are noisy and dusty and messy and have a higher floor-to-floor height. And so from a construction point of view, the segregation made some sense, but as we'll see, it doesn't really reinforce today's learning objectives. So there's a floor plan of that building. And then one more example, this happens to be a comprehensive high school, but again, very clearly segregated with the one-story vocational wing, multi-story academic wing. One of the interesting things on this building too, and the next slide, Laura, shows not only did they have the segregation of the vocational students from the academic students here. You can see the large bay shops and clearly the academic wings, but the school also had segregated cafeteria, segregated dining, where they actually had a separate dining room for the vocational students, partly because they were on a different schedule than the academic students, but also because that was just a perception back then. Again, this is early 70s. You can click on that, Laura. The animation is working for you there. There you go. So you can see the two dining on either side of the central kitchen there. But in terms of where we're headed today, I wanted to share with you one example of a more current building. Literally, this just opened during this pandemic year back in September, so it hasn't quite fully experienced the full intention of how it is to be organized. And also, we don't quite have full professional photographs yet of the interior, but I'll share with you somewhat what we have. One of the things first to notice, it's a multi-story building, and it takes advantage of the sloping site too. Go to the next slide. We'll share some basic goals that working with Frank Locker here, and again, you see some common themes that you might say apply to a lot of our schools at all grade levels, but more and more these days, particularly at career tech schools, where they're one of the more challenging ones that they asked is about flexibility. How do we, high bay shops in particular, are very specialized facilities, specialized equipment. They're often built of concrete block and very durable materials, not easily changed. So how do they evolve, over, a 40, 50-year lifespan of a school? How do we get collaboration into career tech schools? They really saw that, and this is from the visioning session. So before we had even, shared with them some current ideas, they were realizing that their graduates needed these skills. They were already doing project-based learning somewhat, not just in the career, tech shops, but in the academic areas too, which was great and allowed them to sort of more easily merge into a model that, as you can see from that diagram that came out of the visioning sessions, they really wanted to try and achieve, close proximity of academic classrooms with career tech shops, and have distributed science labs, distributed or administrative positions, teacher planning, and really create, smaller learning communities. So here's a floor plan next of how we try to achieve that. It's basically a T-shaped building there where the purple areas are the career tech areas, obviously, and the green areas are the academic areas. And you can see they're in pretty close proximity and they're organized by career clusters. Career clusters are a term not only of, educational programming, but it's actually in the Department of Education's, Chapter 74 frameworks describing how there are certain curricula, certain frameworks that are common to certain careers, and in some of our more recent projects, the school districts have really expressed the desire to try to get those careers together, to get those teachers to be able to collaborate and to collaborate with academic teachers. So we try to achieve that here by giving them each some breakout areas, some collaborative space between the shops and the general classrooms, by locating teacher planning in that proximity, so that the so-called shop teachers don't just hang out in their shop. They try to use that teacher collaborative space when they have an off period, and they actually can sit in the same space as a math teacher and an English teacher and so forth. They can try and work the schedule in such a way that their students collaborate. The idea too with these clusters is to the greatest extent possible, that if you're in, say, the construction academy and you're a carpentry student, that you might be able to take your math class, your English class, in those classrooms across the hall, and really break down the school into smaller learning communities. It's a challenging thing from a scheduling point of view. It can't always be achieved. It's kind of, as we say, kind of the idealized schedule, but we did respond to that with this plan. So there's a science lab in each of those clusters. There's small group rooms. There's teacher planning, as we say, and some administrative space distributed in the school. And we also, in these kind of buildings, one of the other challenges, as you know, is the public is invited into these buildings on a regular occasion, particularly in certain shops, and the cosmetology, culinary arts programs for those schools that have those programs. And so they are located right up front here. The main entrance is at the top of the plan there, the T-shaped plan. On one side is the gym, and the other sort of public space of the building, the administration is there. One of the other things that we like to achieve in these kinds of buildings, one thing we've seen over the years is that students identify more particularly with their shop, with their career area as a student, than they do as, if you ask the student here, where do you go to school? They'd say, I go to the carpentry program at Cape Cod Tech. They identify because they spend so much time with their cohort and with those instructors. And so that's a great thing. It's wonderful that, a group of teachers gets to know, a relatively small group of students really well, but it can also be very isolating. And so one of the things we try to achieve is to have, on a daily basis at least, some kind of common experience in at least how students come and go through the building. So in this plan, for instance, whether you arrive by bus, by car, by bike, walk, all students enter the main entrance and travel through the central core there, past the student commons, past the learning commons on the second floor. And so they do have that common experience and get to see each other. And you'll see we try to introduce as much glass as we can into some of these shops so you can see what's going on in other shops. And you have a lot of opportunity for displaying of common student work as well. And this is a two-story school. You can go to the next plan, Laura. There we are. So there are so-called low bay shops on the upper floor, stacked on top of those high bay shops below, but again, organized in the same way, with academic classrooms, literally across the hall from vocational. And partly this is a result of construction techniques. As I mentioned, early career voc schools, would separate these out just because of the noise, the smoke and all, and fumes and things. And we've been able to overcome that from a construction point of view and get good acoustical separation and still be able to have these shops in close proximity to other areas in the school. One thing to notice on this plan too, just in the center of the building, is there's a common learning commons and art and makerspace and a presentation space right at the intersection of the T corridors there. Again, so that there's a common experience where the students come together in those spaces. And then just to to share a few photos of this school. On the very front page of this is a screen capture from the school's website. So they're very proud of the school. They have great photos of the new school there. So right at the front door, on the right there is the sort of grab and go coffee shop as part of the culinary arts program, right on display. And if you turn your head to the right, next photo is the culinary arts restaurant. Again, open to the main entrance, very easily accessible for the public. And again, part of the common experience for students coming and going every day. As you move through the building, there's the student commons. We take advantage of the sloping site. You can see the ramp and the stairs there to get additional headroom now for the high bay shops to the rear, where the second floor carries through straight. It's the photo again is set up for the COVID classroom there, but that's the, eventually will be the student commons, not just a cafeteria, but a informal presentation space, a hangout space before school, after school, and so forth. And then at the T intersection, here's looking down that corridor where shops are on the right and classrooms, shops are on the left and classrooms are on the right there. And it's a two-story space. So the same configuration happens up above. We move down, you can see one of the collaboration areas, sort of the breakout spaces next. Right here, this happens to be on the second floor, so we can get some daylight in with a clear story lighting. But again, classrooms open directly onto this, and behind the photographer here on this are the shops as well. Teacher planning is behind the glass to the right, so there's sort of supervision, but also collaboration. Here's the learning commons in the center of the building on the second floor. And as we said, the sort of combination art and makerspace is to the right there. And then the last space to share is that this, again, I apologize for the photo. It's not quite a finished photo here, but it's a very flexible presentation production space where with pull-out auditorium seating, it can be a flat floor for robotics presentation, science fair, that kind of thing. And it really gives students an opportunity to practice the so-called soft skills of oral presentation, of collaboration. It's a great space. It actually opens onto a rooftop patio too, so they can have outdoor learning as well there. So that's Cape Cod Tech. And hopefully I think we may be able to get to tour it as part of the K-12 committee, I think in September or so, if we can get that to work.
That's great. I'd love to see that. It's such a great building, Carl. Carl touched on a lot of the things that we both, I think, spend a lot of time on as we're going through the initial. We're going to skip back to the beginning. How do you start to create a building like Cape Cod Tech? And we start with a visioning process. Both firms do this, and Career Tech people do. Obviously, architects are doing this with all of their projects, but Career Tech has some unusual angles to it that I think we need. That I'd just like to review. And Carl talked a little bit about the outcomes, but how do we get to those things? Every Career Tech school is different. They have different programs, they have different philosophies, they have different ways of bringing their students together and of creating team spirit within their different programs. So it's really incumbent on us as designers to understand their strengths and what they see as their strengths before we start designing for their future. Career Tech schools are also very unusual because the public plays a very strong role, even stronger than in many other public schools. There are different relationships with the public. You have the public coming in and making use of the Career Tech programs. Carl pointed out the culinary program. Often the public is coming in to get their cars repaired, to have publications printed up, to whether it's welding or culinary, cosmetology. So the public, there's a strong interface with the public. In addition, there can also be in some vocational Career Tech schools, there can be adult learning that will be going on parallel to the student programs. You also have the career tech programs have what are called advisories, which are public members of the community who are engaged in the specific occupations, professions, and bring their expertise and advice and insights back to the high school, different high school programs. So every program will have an advisory. So as you're setting goals for the future school, you really need to be very cognizant of all of these different inputs that are somewhat unusual. And in addition, there's the normal community inputs, making use of the gym or the theater, using the building perhaps for civic events. So on top of that, you have these very specialized relationships with the public that need to be brought into the planning process. The synergies between the career tech programs and the academic spaces. At Cape Cod Tech, there was very strong integration. A lot of the CTE educators are working towards that, and some are not used to that. This has not been the traditional way of doing things. So as we do our visioning, we spend time looking at, in some cases, provoking some of the educators and community members to think about the synergies that can arrive in supporting the students holistically by these integrations and different ways of integrating the day-to-day academics with the day-to-day tech programs. This is just has not. Some of the educators weren't brought up with this approach, and it can be new to them. Some of the community members don't see the need for it, so that's part of the visioning to kind of perhaps move that understanding a bit. There are a lot of career tech programs that are now working hard to make sure their curriculum is relevant and engaging for their students by integrating very challenging global issues, often around the environment. This is what students in many cases are interested in and want, and it fits in many different ways that curriculums can integrate this. So we're thinking about that as we talk to the educators. We're also thinking about it as we go through our design process. How can we engage the students in thinking about making this a green school? How can the school be a tool for teaching kids once it's constructed about the environment or about other possible issues that are relevant to their day-to-day lives? So it becomes an opportunity to bring their education into our design process, and we will regularly have students work with us on design pieces of the projects. At recent project, kids help design the student commons. So it's a way to extend their education and think about design as part of their world. How did this happen? I just want to talk about that kind of goal setting, visioning at Bristol Plymouth Regional Vocational High School. This is a school that we're just working on schematic design now. Carl is going to talk about Northeast Metro Tech, which is kind of a slightly more advanced study, and each firm went through these kind of visioning processes with the staff. It was very interesting because there were a group of educators at Bristol Plymouth who had very clear ideas of what the goals should be, and discussing it with them, those came out very clearly. Wanting their students to be creative problem solvers and capable of independent inquiry across disciplines. So we went in there thinking, wow, okay, this is going to be great. The opportunity for integrating academics and doing interesting problem solving is going to be an integral part of this design process. Well, not everyone felt that way. There were people all across the spectrum in terms of, wait a minute, we do this in a traditional manner because this is the way it's always been done. And they were concerned about a lot of the things that Carl spoke about the noise or the smells from the shops interfering with academic studies. So we went through kind of 3 different models with them during our visioning process. The number 1 was having back to this, let's separate the voc tech and the academic zones, because there were individuals who felt that that was the way that a career tech school should be. We talked about having integrating with the academics with the voc tech, but having the academics be very flexible, that there wasn't the kind of clustering that Carl spoke about. And then we talked, the third was the having academic clusters or pods, where you really try and develop a sense, you try and break down the school into smaller units and have some cohesiveness amongst those units. At Bristol Plymouth, they really went for the this integrated voc tech cluster with the academic classroom approach. When you're going through these, you're not just talking big picture. Because of the complexity of career tech schools, you really get into relationships of specific areas, whether it's the different clusters, different career clusters, how the public interfaces with each of those different clusters, because it'll be in different ways. So you get into a pretty fine-grained relationships very early on in the visioning process, because all of these relationships have an impact on everything else. The team, the HMFH team, really came up with an early concept of how do you integrate, how do you both clearly define the different types, the different clusters, career clusters, and integrate those flexibly with the academic classroom. So in this case, the concept was the career tech, the large shops would be around the perimeter, and the academic classrooms would be where you have very simple repetitive units, would be around the interior with the central courtyard. And then these yellow areas were very much a part of the whoops, getting away from here. The yellow zones were these project areas where you could have direct collaboration between the academic and the career, or public areas where student public areas where people would be coming together. So this very simple notion of having the specialized spaces on the outside where they were easily accessible to the public. In Bristol Plymouth, the community, the school did not want the public to enter the school. Everything had to be done on the periphery. So there was no public presence within the school. It's all separate entrances around the periphery to get into the programs that you're accessing. So that was what you're seeing here is these large large spaces around the 3 sides of the periphery, the academic classroom, repetitive academic spaces in the center around a courtyard. And that quickly evolved into, relatively quickly, started to evolve with this sense of a courtyard. Part of this is that one doesn't realize until you're working on these spaces how large these shops are. You're talking about multiple spaces the sizes of gymnasiums strung out. So how do you keep kids together when the physical spaces are so large that by their nature, the circulation goes on and on just to have spaces near to one another. The courtyard allows that easy circulation and access to all, so students are able to experience the whole building and not be miles away from one another. At the same time, there was a desire to make sure that the courtyard was easily accessible from the exterior. So the courtyard is in fact on the ground floor, very open to the outside, so it's easy to move in and out. But you get that sense of circulation. These project areas are around at various spaces, various locations around the building. The large shops are around the periphery, and the public is entering them from the exterior. The hub of the school is this central piece where it's a media center, the auditorium, the cafeteria are all right in the center where everyone has fairly easy access to it. Some of the most publicly accessed programs, the childcare, the graphics, the cosmetology, the culinary arts are off a secondary drive, so the public can park and go into those spaces easily. This again, you can see the double height spaces, and one thing that has made this integration a little bit easier is that there are more spaces now, more career spaces that are one-story spaces than traditionally. There's less of the large scale. There are fewer of the large-scale shops and more of biotech, dental, cosmetology that don't require the large double bay spaces. So that makes our planning a little bit easier. So I'm going to let Carl go through his planning for the Northeast Metro Tech.
These projects are somewhat parallel tracks here, but at Northeast Metro Tech in Wakefield, the feasibility study resulted in the proposal to replace the existing school also with new construction. The site very much a factor here. The existing school there, you can see it in the foreground of the site. Again, one of the sprawling 1960s, 70s vocational schools, mostly one story as well. But the buildable area on the site is really that wooded hillside there, fairly long, narrow, with significant topography and ledge. And also the access to the school right now is from the right of the slide, shared driveway with Wakefield High School, which really makes for some traffic congestions at arrival and dismissal times. But it's a wonderful site in the sense that it's adjacent to Breakout Reservation. With the proposed location being on the hillside, it will be in a wooded context. So that has some great opportunities. In the visioning sessions here too, we basically ended up with many of the same goals as Laura just touched on. In the next slide there, Laura, shows some of the thoughts of, again, organizing the building into smaller learning communities, particularly because the school really had a desire to grow. Their current enrollment is something in the vicinity of 1,250 students, but for the past many years, at least going back 5 or 10 years, they've been turning away hundreds of students every year in the admissions policy. They had spaces in the freshman class for about 300 students or so, and they've been getting applications in the 600 and 700 range. And even when you cull out, some ineligibles, but they've been turning away something like 40% of the applicants here. So they knew from the 12 sending communities, there was great desire for this kind of education. And so we ultimately ended up, after looking at several options, at a projected enrollment of 1,600 students. So the school is growing by, roughly 1/3, which is a pretty significant step. And they realized too that it would help in the organization to break it up into smaller learning communities. And again, wanting to organize it in career clusters. And this is one of the diagrams that came out of the visioning sessions, again, that they recognized the value of getting the career shops together. They currently are a little bit haphazard as to where they're located. They're not organized by career cluster necessarily. They wanted to have breakout space for both the shops and the academic classrooms. They did want to distribute things like science labs, small group rooms, administrative space throughout the building. again, to handle the size growth. Also to consider a freshman academy, because in vocational schools in particular, ninth graders are on a sort of specialized unique schedule where the first half or almost 3/4 of the school year, they're in an exploratory program where, unlike the upperclassmen who go to shop one week and academics the alternate week, the freshmen explore many shops, which is actually a great opportunity in and of itself to expose them to multiple shops. But then somewhere in January, February or so, they make a first, second, and third choice of what shop they want to be in and all. So their schedule is a little bit different, and like in traditional academic high schools, you know, the transition from middle school to high school can be a bit challenging too. So handling ninth graders makes some sense that way. So they wanted one of these small learning communities to have the potential of being a freshman academy as well. So we are in the schematic design phase, but to just show you the diagram that we shared with the MSBA and at the end of the feasibility study was stacking the school on actually 4 levels, 3 main stories and a lower level to take advantage of the hillside there. Once we create a level building pad with the assistance of some dynamite, there will be a fair amount of blasting on this project. But again, the notion you can see there is stacking shops and stacking academic areas on top of shops. The public areas, public assembly areas of the gymnasium and cafeteria and auditorium are at one end of the building, the academic areas to the left. And the building takes a sort of rectangular form because that's the available land there, and trying to get access to the shops is obviously important. But to zoom in kind of, or to show how stacking might be achieved, there's a precedent there from Cape Cod Tech. The next one there on the right is the high bay shops below, a vegetated roof above, because the low bay shops on the upper floors aren't the same depth or footprint, but it gives a wonderful opportunity for outdoor learning there as well. And here's a small learning community, and there are 4 of these in the proposed school, so they reach about 400 students, and they could actually be broken down even further. But you can see the shops are on one side of the main corridor, then organized around a small light well or courtyard are various academic areas, science labs, special ed rooms, small group rooms, breakout areas, some traditional classrooms, as some guidance and administrative space. So that's how this school is proposed. And we use this precedent of one of the breakout spaces to share with them, because again, for many of these teachers, probably most of these teachers, they've never experienced this. They don't have it in their current school. It takes them getting used to. We have visited other schools as well, and shared some precedents with them too. And they seem to be embracing it. They are another school that already does some cross-discipline and some project-based activities, not just within the shop, which is almost always project-based, but with the academic disciplines as well. And then one other model to share with you, this is Taconic High School out in Pittsfield. This is a comprehensive high school, meaning of the 950 students or so, literally half of them about are career tech students, and half are traditional academic based students. So there's a mixture there. And one of the goals in this school was not only to have integration for the sake of the career tech students, but to have integration for the sake of the entire school, to make it feel like, as one of the principles that came out of the visioning sessions, it should feel like one school with 2 curricula, so that again, there's not that separation. So the solution being proposed again was a multi-story building to make it a more compact footprint, to make it to make it easier to achieve that integration and collaboration. This is the diagram that we use because they were transitioning from a very traditional organization where there was an English department and all their classrooms were together. There was science department and so forth, like many high schools. Here we actually stack those academic classrooms and organize them into clusters on top of the high bay shops below, and decentralize the administration, decentralized science labs so that they could be organized in a variety of ways. When they moved into the building, if they still were of the departmental organization, that could work, but the hope was that they would evolve into academies, perhaps a freshman academy, a humanities, a STEM. They called it SEA in their terminology, but it's basically science and engineering as well. And then it also has the possibility of being organized vertically, where the career tech spaces on the ground floor are organized by career clusters. So the construction shops are together, the transportation shops are together, and they could be organized vertically to have their academic classrooms stacked above. In the vertical circulation is distributed in the building in such a way that it could support that. And the other thing in Pittsfield, they have 2 high schools. They're thinking of future expansion, that this one site may become their single high school. Enrollments are declining in the Berkshires, and we also planned it so that these clusters could expand, and the resources and central infrastructure is there in those vertical cores. Stories. So here's the floor plan, an L-shaped building. Again, you can see that academic classrooms are directly across the corridor from some of the high bay shops there, where they have access from the rear service yard. But again, there's that common experience of everyone enters the main entrance there at the intersection of the L, whether you arrive by car or bus or bike or walk, everyone enters there. So there's that common. The student commons is on the first floor. The learning commons is above that on the second floor. The public functions of gym and auditorium are there as well. And then you can see how the career or the academic classrooms rather are organized into clusters, again with some vegetated roof on top of the high bay shops to provide some better prospects looking out those windows, because the footprints don't match up exactly for those dimensions, but and again, we've figured out a way from a construction point of view to manage the acoustics so that there's no noise transmittance from the high bay shops below to the academic classrooms above. And a couple shops there.
So that was, as Carl was saying, that's a comprehensive high school. The next model we're going to look at is from New Hampshire, where they have separated, traditionally they've had separated academic and career tech, what they call career tech centers, CTCs. We were hired in Dover, the existing building. The 2 schools were adjacent to one another, so they did share a library, they shared the gym, they shared the cafeteria, but they were, and the CTC students made use of the academic spaces, but they were highly separated schools with different administrators. New Hampshire funds the CTC schools separately from the traditional academic high schools. And yet Dover had a very strong desire to integrate to the greatest degree possible, really make it one school, that there'd be, the students would feel that the career programs were equally important to the academic programs, and there wouldn't be any sense of isolation of one group of students from another. With the CTC schools, there's the third component, that there are students coming from around the region at times during the day to partake in the specific CTC program. So it's a complicated integration problem or challenge. The goals that were set up there, see a lot of similarity here. We talked about the integration of the academic high school with the career tech education programs. They wanted hands-on learning opportunities throughout the school. They wanted highly flexible. Dover also was very community oriented. They really wanted to invite the community in. They are very community oriented. This high school had to be for the entire community. So unlike Bristol Plymouth, which kind of keeps the community to the periphery, Dover invited the community into the center of the high school. They wanted to have a town square that would be considered a community space for events. For it's the lobby for the gym. It's the lobby for the auditorium that would be both be used by the community. So that town square is a very public space with the cosmetology program and the nursing practitioner program off of that central town square space. So a little bit different in that way, but many of the same themes. So the interesting thing was integrating these two schools that were funded very differently, and we were actually counting square footage of classrooms because you had to account under these two different mechanisms. We pushed. They didn't want the career tech did not want to pay for corridor space that the academic high schools students were using, or for bathrooms that the high school students were using. So it was a little bit of a challenging logistical problem. And what evolved was, this is actually, again, a sloped site. So it's the main entrance was on the one of the ground floors, the first floor. You can see the main entrance here. You move into the town square, which is actually below, but you have the cosmetology and the culinary arts off of this program on the second floor. The purple spaces are the career tech programs. So you can see the career tech programs are interspersed with the academic classrooms. There really is no separation whatsoever, only to the extent that the large double bay, high bay spaces are in corners in their clusters. But as you're moving through the school, you're moving past classrooms, then you go past some of the career spaces, then you go past more classrooms. The going down to the first floor, going down the stairs, then you're actually at the town square, which opens up to a large central courtyard that helps unify the whole school and is really part of their circulation, as well as providing outdoor classroom space. And then the second floor, again, you're seeing this integration of the career tech programs with the classrooms scattered around the school. The school is a very dynamic place. There is a lot of public use. When you go in there in the late afternoon, there'll be a range of students doing athletics and adults participating in some community event. It's used by the community on weekends very heavily. Their parents, their community members in every day going to the culinary arts program or to cosmetology. So it's an interesting and I think quite wonderful model of making the school a really community school. This is the town square with a step seating so that you can have presentations that here. You can see how it opens up out to the courtyard. There's another amphitheater just outside those doors so that you can have outdoor classrooms. There are also, oops, very touchy. There are art classrooms that open out to the courtyard so that the art students can be working indoors and outdoors. It's a very open, lots of transparency throughout the building. So on the one hand, you're creating this wonderful space for people to move through and experience a range of types of spaces and activities. On the other hand, you're having to create shops and labs that have very specialized needs and very specific infrastructure requirements. So that's one of the interesting challenges of a CTE school, is that you're working on these multiple levels to bring students together in different ways, provide the social experiences, the collaborative experiences around the school, make sure that there is no sense of having anyone be a second-class student. And at a different level, you're creating very specialized spaces with highly individualized technical safety and life safety, health and life safety needs, and acoustical and indoor air quality needs. This is a carpentry shop and a auto shop, and you can see how different the layouts are. For the auto shop, for instance, you have to have a good handle on equipment. You got to know what's the latest diagnostic equipment and lifts that career is going to be working with once the students get out into the careers, and make sure those are in the spaces, that they have the infrastructure to support them. At the same time, they're fully accessible. You also have a number of safety concerns you have to be aware of. The spacing around any piece of equipment, so that there's a safety zone around every piece, around pieces of equipment. There are eye washes, there are fire blankets, there are emergency stops for automated equipment. There are stops for automated doors. So that's another layer of experience that goes that goes on to each of these. Each individual space has its own safety requirements. We talked about acoustical requirements, and each space has acoustical requirements, both to deaden noise within the space so that the students can hear one another, can hear their teacher, and also to separate the noise from the academic spaces. So the acoustics become very complex. We also, the ability to be able to hear fire alarms when they go off, when there's loud equipment going on. That's another layer that Tina's particularly engaged with in Dover. Plumbing requirements. Every space is going to have individual plumbing, fire protection requirements, HVAC requirements, and the exhaust requirements for the different types of equipment, the drainage requirements for in a shop like this. So each of these shops is a unique and highly specialized, highly integrated design challenge in and of itself, to make sure that the students have access to the right equipment, that equipment is supported, and that it's a safe and healthy environment for all participants. The last school we're going to look at is Bristol County Agricultural High School, which is a kind of a third type of, you've got the comprehensive schools, you've got the career tech centers, you've got the projects like up in New Hampshire, where you have the two separate schools that have traditionally existed apart and are now coming together. And I guess a fourth type might be a specialized career tech school, in this case, Bristol County Agricultural High School, which is built on a farm and was traditionally intended to help students develop skills in agricultural careers. It's been evolving. And with this new campus, that evolutionary process is going even further, so that the students will really be, regardless of their careers, will be heavily aware of and have integrated environmental issues, science, and technology as part of their careers moving forward. So the part of the goals for the high school were really to create a new campus and take what had traditionally been very siloed, independent career paths and try and bring the students, the educators together as much as possible, and to integrate, to raise the awareness of science and the environment as underlying threads through any vocation that you choose within the program. So the creating places for students to come together, strengthening the school's identity, assuring that energy efficiency and sustainable agriculture and sustainability curriculum were integral throughout the campus. Were some of their goals. The campus is unlike any of the schools that we've talked about. It's a dispersed campus. On your left is the full campus, which is along the Taunton River. This is the farmland, and then there were 27 buildings dispersed around that campus. So you can see how it would be very easy to silo different programs. The intent of the new buildings, which are primarily in orange here, was to create a outdoor pedestrian walkway that would be a central spine that would connect the students together as they were moving through the campus, that they would all be using. At the center of that pedestrian path is their student commons, their dining and media center, an outdoor eating and amphitheater that will really be the social hub of the school. And Bristol Aggie is a pretty amazing place. The students are totally engaged in their studies and spend large portions of their day out of doors. So being out of doors is part of their culture, part of their what they want to be doing. During the past year, during COVID, their dining was in a tent outdoors, and they adapted pretty easily. So it's an amazing bunch of students, and this, I think, will help bring them together in a way that the old campus just was unable to do. Just briefly, the Gilbert Hall was their primary academic space and will still serve as the center for their math, history, and English. The Center for Science and the Environment brings together their animal programs, their natural resource programs, and their environmental technology programs. And then the rest are labeled here. You can see there's the arbor program and landscape, and their ag mech and their floriculture, which we didn't touch. The yellow is the existing buildings, and the orange are the brand new dairy barn. Again, highly specialized in space. When I started architecture school, I never thought that I'd be designing a dairy barn, but I know a lot more about cows now than I ever did before. Another challenge was this all had to be done while the students were in place, so there was a lot of movement of students across over the last year, and for even moving into the fall. But most of the campus will be open will be opening in the fall of this coming fall. Some of the buildings are already opened, but again, students are being shuffled around even as we speak. Just some examples, some pictures from the school. This is the student commons, which will be open early in May. So it's still, they're doing their final touches on it. You can see the amphitheater Whoops, sorry. This is the amphitheater. The dining hall is right inside here. So this will be both an open eating area, access to the dining area, as well as a public performance space. This is the interior dining space and part of the media center above. Student Commons, the new Center for Science and the Environment, help form together those two buildings, create a surround for the outdoor Student Commons, the gathering space. The Center for Science and the Environment will have a museum, a natural history museum on the first floor that the students will be helping to curate. They're just starting to look at what some of the exhibits might be. They've got several large water tanks that will be different aquarium representing different environments along the Taunton River from the coast up to the headwaters of the Taunton River with different environments on it. There'll be tidal, so the kids can watch the tides move in and out. Not only will the students be going by this every day as they go to their science classrooms, but it will also be open to the public. So outside community groups or organizations can come in and learn about the microenvironments that are part of southeastern Massachusetts. There's so much going on here. It's hard to even begin to talk about all of it. They do a lot of work with endangered species. There'll be labs here for helping to care for endangered species that are then helped back into the environment. The kids are taking care of the animals. There are spaces for the small and large animal courses, curriculum. There are bunnies and birds and fish. So in the sense, it's a very non-traditional career tech school because very few high bay spaces, very highly specialized lab environments. A big part of this is the sustainability that was part of the design and will be part of the existing building. It'll be the first public school in Massachusetts with composting toilets. There is rainwater collection for localized irrigation, as well as very drought-resistant plantings all across the disturbed campus. There will be a lot of graphics around the building, illustrating the building, making the building into a teaching tool for the environmental tech program. The building management system that runs the mechanical systems will actually be a classroom. There will be both intensive and extensive green roofs. The dairy barn will be a net zero energy building. So the whole site is an arboretum for the arboriculture classrooms. So it's quite the engaging program on all levels, and really shows how the schools today are looking forward to how best they can engage their kids with the topics and curriculum that really speak to those students. And I think on that note, we've talked a lot. So I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry, just clicking the wrong screen here.
Have we got some questions?
We do have one question. Thank you for that presentation. It's great. We have a question from Robert Frenny, and he's asking about discussing how much education has changed over the past 10 to 20 years and where you think it's heading in the next 10 to 20 years, as well as how we can keep up with the ever-changing delivery. That's an easy question.
We have another hour and a half. Well,
what is it? Go ahead.
I'll start, Laura. I think one of the surprising things you might say is that a lot of the practices that we just talked about for career tech education are ones that traditional schools are trying to implement and sort of catch up on, because they see where the future is headed. And in terms of, you might think that career tech schools are all about training kids for a particular career. Like, if you go in ninth grade and, somewhere halfway through you choose, the electrical shop, the thought is you're going to become an electrician when you graduate. Well, more and more these days, that's not the case. That the career tech schools are learning that what it's really about is teaching lifelong learning skills about, collaboration and creative problem solving, and being prepared for, having 2 or 3 or 5 different careers in the future. So I think there's definitely an emphasis on teaching those kind of skills. And we're going to see more and more of that across the board. And the other, a couple other points about career tech education, when you look at it, it really is kind of personalized education. We talk about that, in other visioning sessions, but here we're giving students a choice to sample, a dozen different curricula when they're in ninth grade, and they choose one. And in that sense, they're participating in their own education, which is a principle we see more and more of. Career tech schools have a glorified block scheduling, you might say. Again, traditional high schools talk about having block scheduling where you can spend more time on one activity. Well, here, career tech schools, they spend their entire week in shop, where the instructors are free to make their own schedules. It's not, 45 minutes and the bell rings and you change classes. So, and then also the real world experience is not just in the shop, but a great many juniors and seniors in particular at career tech schools are out in the world in internships, positions almost, where they spend, entire days or at least afternoons away from school in environments. And they, obviously realize, what parts of their education is relevant to what's going on out there and so forth. And as Laura mentioned, there are advisory committees made up of, business professionals, real world folks, not educators, who come in and advise the schools as to what's going on currently, so that they can, year to year, semester to semester almost, adjust their curriculum and even their equipment choices and things like that to fit what's going on in the real world. So I think those are all trends that, CTE schools are already implementing, that other, so-called traditional high schools would benefit from.
I'm just going to add, I totally agree with everything Carl said. I'm just going to add on 2 things in that nationally, there's a trend where, and in Massachusetts as well, there's more demand for career tech programs than there are seats available. So it's becoming, I think, more and more parents are realizing that this is a really good choice for their students. So the parents are realizing it, that they're seeing the results often at college and university level, having a career tech program where students have actually had hands-on experience makes them better prepared for some of the secondary school curriculum. So there's a demand. At the same time, at the other end of the scale, we're starting to see middle schools that are interested in how can they integrate real world challenges and hands-on learning into their curriculum, and bringing early career programs into middle schools in very, very strong ways. So I think that it is happening, not necessarily as an organized directive, but because the demand is there, and because educators are seeing that the hands-on learning, the real life focus, the ability to engage in problems that the students see as having impact on their lives, and the benefit of introducing students to a range of careers so that they just have a broader sense of what the possibilities are. All of these things are helpful for all students, regardless of your ultimate, where you end up in the world. So they are, by their nature, I think, to some degree or another, the type of learning that has been evolving through the career tech education programs is impacting high schools and middle schools. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolution takes place. Now, we also have in our audience, and I don't know if she's willing to speak up, but we have the superintendent from the Bristol Aggie School, Adele Sands, has been listening in. I think she's still with us. Adele, would you care to comment on, oh, she may have already, I'm sorry, it looks like she's already gotten off, but I was going to see if she was interested. Or if there are other educators who are in this group, please feel free to jump in here. Did that answer the question?
Laura, I'll add that upon last check anyway, that every career CTE school in the state of Massachusetts is a level 1 school. And so that's a telling sign, but and we were discussing just before this session started how we're seeing high schools create very similar or creative paths, if not career tech education pathway programs that connect very much to real world and to kind of give students kind of a 4-year journey working toward transferable skills, but towards a specialty at the same time. And I think one of the important things that's changed, the evolution from vocational tech to career tech was very deliberate in the renewal of the Perkins program, and the focus was on college and career ready transferable skills, and so that's where I think the focus has really improved. I mean, the students are coming out with the potential to be leaders in their industries with choices and options, and most going on to college and kind of furthering advancement. That's great.
The data, Bob, is that more than 50% of CTE graduates are going on to additional education. They're not just going into a trade.
Yeah, at least a two-year schools, if not beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the schools, I'll just finish one sentence. Some of the students, though, are finding that they have strong career opportunities right out of high school and are able to do quite well financially without going to college. So it's not necessary to be your goal to go to college, and there's still good career, good financially stable opportunities right out of high school. I'm sorry, someone was starting to speak.
Yeah, sorry, this is Robert Frenny. I had asked a question, and just to piggyback on that question, I know we're sort of focusing on 9th grade through 12th grade, but I'm just curious, how does this hands-on and sort of lab work and, just basically hands-on based training or education, how does it also translate to the lower grade levels? We have a client right now that's really trying to do a new school in Lynn, and it's based around hydroponics and teaching kids how to be hands-on. So, we're trying to figure out what components of that should be, in addition to just the hydroponics. What else should the school be offering to really offer that hands-on learning at a low grade level?
We're doing so is that what levels, what grades?
So the challenge is it's K through 8. So, I think the partner's still trying to figure out how they provide education as well. So we're working through it with them.
There's lots of wonderful project-based learning examples out there, both more career-oriented and more, whether it's history or English-oriented. that get kids engaged with solving problems. And there's Nuvu in Cambridge that has all. It's basically gets kids doing hands-on projects that are math, history, English. They could be related to anything, but the kids are doing things, building things to solve based on research on real life problems. Newton High School has had a wonderful program that's an environmental, organized around environmental issues. And every year there's a theme that's introduced and the kids do research in that theme and then develop ideas around how do I solve a real world problem. Andover does much the same thing with a range of themes, and the kids are encouraged to develop ideas, entrepreneurial ideas to solve problems. So it doesn't. I've seen French classes where the students are tasked at the beginning of the year. They're learning French, but one of their tasks is to design a French restaurant with French in Paris. So they have to be able to go online and talk to people about menus and spaces and figure out how to design a restaurant and do it all in French. So it can happen in lots of different ways. We're seeing middle school that's now one of our projects that's under construction right now is in Weymouth. And in Weymouth, it's a 5 through 8 school. I'm sorry, it's a 6 through 8 school. But there have 3 lab spaces, each with a different career focus. And the kids will be going to these 3 different areas over the course of their careers, of their middle school careers, and really engaging in the ideas around those 3 different programs. So it's happening in lots of different ways and at all different levels.
I would just add, Laura, that it does take a little bit of investment, obviously, in space and in equipment and in time, you might say, in scheduling. But because of the flexibility, it seems obviously that in K through 8 at all grades that, maker spaces, project areas, breakout areas, and project-based learning can be introduced relatively easily with fairly modest investments there in those activities. And I think that the idea, or one of the great advantages of project-based and collaborative learning is that you can allow the students to find their talents, experience those that learn best with hands-on, those that might be more visual, those who whatever lecture oriented are all given an opportunity to collaborate and experience the other talents and skills too. So no matter what the project is, you have those opportunities to develop those skills.
So we have just a couple more questions. One of the questions is about what's been going on during the pandemic with these career tech schools and how are they doing sort of this type of hands-on work remotely?
Yeah, we joked about how the automotive kids are going to be, changing the oil on their parents' cars at home as a way to get hands-on learning while they're home. It's not easy, and the clients we've talked to replicate that hands-on learning at home. Fortunately, there were some pretty creative instructors out there who were able to put together like packets of materials that students came by, the school picked up and brought home, worked on at home when they were still, 100% remote. The others, many of the career tech schools, even if they're a hybrid model, they've tried to get the 50% of the kids on the shop week to get back into the building, socially distanced. Fortunately, the shops are fairly large, high bay spaces. You can socially distance and so forth. So, but it definitely has been a challenge. There is some good technology out there that sort of virtually replicates some things, but again, if you're truly a hands-on learner, you know, manipulating a mouse on a screen is not quite the same as using, you know, actual materials and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, the schools that I've been aware of have tried to do, quickly got back into the hybrid mode where they were you know, having the kids come in 2 days a week to do their hands-on activities. But interestingly enough, I mean, going back to the earlier question, the BSA here has been doing a lot for younger kids to bring tools and materials to schools that can then be distributed with hands-on design thinking problems. So for younger kids, the pandemic has really been an opportunity to do hands-on projects with some materials delivered to them, and then instruction through with online from the teachers. So there's been, I'm curious to see if there really hasn't been more hands-on stuff to keep kids engaged while they're at home by simply bringing them simple materials to work with, and that would be at, you know, elementary school level. So we're just starting to work on a middle school in New Hampshire, and it'll be really, really interesting to see. The first visioning is going to be about how do we move forward with what we've learned from COVID, and I think that's going to be really interesting for me to kind of learn from the educators what they're seeing is what have they learned about remote learning. Certainly there's some kids who have thrived through remote learning, and other kids who have had really serious challenges through remote learning. So are there positive things that we've learned that can come back into the classroom and have a positive impact on how we design classrooms in the future? But it's been a struggle for everybody, and I think for the career tech, it's been a double struggle because they rely on that hands-on activity.
Just to add to that, our Bristol Plymouth client, I know they've been trying to get their students out into the community to work too for hands-on. So even if they couldn't all be in the school together, they found partners in the community to take the students and sort of get that real world hands-on training that way.
Yeah.
So I think actually we're just about out of time here. I want to thank you both for presenting this morning, and thank you everybody for joining us. This was recorded, so we'll put it on our website, and if anybody in your offices or clients had missed it, please, you know, jump on there and see. You can share it with them.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.
You know, it's obviously for Carl and me, this is stuff we like talking about. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Great. Everybody have a good
Thanks,
rest.
Bob.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good talking.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.